The turret wouldn't move. 25,000 feet over Germany, Staff Sergeant Michael Arcangelo pulled the charging handle of his top turret guns and felt nothing. The hydraulic system had frozen solid. Below him, 9 Focke-Wulf 190s were climbing hard, their noses beginning to glow with muzzle flash. His B-17, the Devil's Daughter, was about to become a sitting duck. This is the story of the man who turned a mechanical failure into the deadliest improvised weapon in 8th Air Force history. January 1944. The skies over Nazi Germany belonged to whoever could shoot fastest and think faster. Michael Arcangelo was 22 years old, a kid from South Boston who'd grown up fixing cars in his father's garage. He joined the Army Air Forces in 1942, convinced that his mechanical knowledge would keep him on the ground. Instead, they'd put him in a turret and told him to aim for the engine cowlings. He was good at it, real good. By January of '44, Arcangelo had 12 confirmed kills. He'd flown 27 missions over occupied Europe, watched friends go down in flames, and learned that survival wasn't about being the best shot. It was about being the most stubborn. The mission that morning was Stuttgart, a ball-bearing factory that the brass said was critical to the German war machine. Arcangelo didn't care much about ball bearings. He cared about the 250 B-17s flying in formation, each one packed with 10 men who wanted to go home. The weather was murder. Clear skies meant perfect visibility for German fighters. The temperature outside was 60 below zero. Inside the aircraft, it wasn't much better. Arcangelo had been in his turret for 3 hours when the hydraulics seized. He felt it happen. One moment, the twin 50 caliber machine guns were tracking smoothly. The next, they were locked in place, pointing uselessly at empty sky. He yanked the manual override. Nothing. The cold had turned the hydraulic fluid into something closer to tar, and that's when he saw them. 9 FW-190s, rising from below in a perfect attack formation. The German pilots had spotted a straggler, a B-17 that had dropped out of formation with engine trouble. They were moving in for the kill, and the Devil's Daughter was directly in their path. Arcangelo's pilot, Lieutenant James Kowalski, came over the intercom. His voice was tight, professional. "Top turret, we've got bandits at 4 o'clock low. Can you engage?" Arcangelo pressed his throat mic. "Negative. Turret's frozen. Guns won't traverse." There was a pause, a long one. "Copy that. Waist gunners, prepare to engage." But Arcangelo knew the math. The waist guns had limited fields of fire. The ball turret was focused below. If those FW-190s came in from the angle they were setting up, most of the Devil's Daughter's defensive armament would be useless. He looked at his guns, fixed in place, pointing at nothing. Then he looked at the attacking fighters, still climbing, still setting up their attack run. And Michael Arcangelo had an idea so stupid, so reckless, that it just might work. He grabbed his throat mic. "Skipper, I need you to trust me. I need you to fly the aircraft." Kowalski's response was immediate. "I am flying the aircraft, Sergeant." "No, sir. I need you to fly it like a gun mount. I'll call the turns. You make them happen. We'll point the whole damn plane at them." The intercom went silent. Arcangelo could picture Kowalski in the cockpit, processing what he just heard, using a 4-engine heavy bomber as a swivel mount for a jammed turret. It was insane. "Say again, Sergeant?" Arcangelo didn't hesitate. "My guns are fixed, but the aircraft isn't. You put them in my sights, I'll do the rest. But I need you to fly exactly where I tell you." Another pause, shorter this time. "All right, Mike, call it." The FW-190s were closing now. Arcangelo could see their yellow nose markings, could count the individual aircraft. The lead fighter was already lining up his approach. Arcangelo pressed the mic. "Right bank 5 degrees, steady, steady, hold it." The B-17 tilted, slowly at first, then more firmly as Kowalski committed to the maneuver. Arcangelo watched through his gun sight as the sky rotated. The lead FW-190 drifted into his crosshair. "Steady, hold, hold." The German pilot hadn't expected it. Why would he? B-17s didn't maneuver. They flew straight, absorbed punishment, and relied on formation firepower. They didn't dance. Arcangelo squeezed the trigger. The twin 50s roared. Tracer rounds reached out across 300 yards of freezing sky. The FW-190 flew directly into the stream of fire. Arcangelo saw pieces separate from the wing root, saw smoke erupt from the engine, saw the fighter roll inverted and begin its long fall to the German countryside below. One down. "Level out. Port bank 10 degrees now." Kowalski didn't question it. The B-17 rolled left. The remaining 8 FW-190s had scattered, confused by the bomber's aggressive maneuvering. One had pulled up too sharply. He was hanging on his prop, vulnerable. Arcangelo walked his fire into the fighter's belly. The FW-190 came apart. 2 down. The intercom exploded with chatter. The waist gunners were calling targets, confused about what was happening. The ball turret gunner was shouting that he had no shot. And through it all, Arcangelo stayed focused on the geometry of death. Nose down, 5 degrees, right bank, 3 degrees, steady. Kowalski flew the aircraft like he was part of Arcangelo's nervous system. Every correction, every tiny adjustment came instantly. The B-17 wasn't graceful. It was a 30-ton sledgehammer being wielded with surgical precision. Another WWII crossed Arcangelo's sights. He fired, missed, corrected. 2 degrees right, the B-17 shifted. He fired again. The German fighter's canopy shattered. The pilot's body slumped forward. The aircraft nosed over and dove away. 3 down. The remaining 6 FW-190s had figured out what was happening. They split into 2 groups trying to attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Standard fighter tactics. Overwhelm the defensive guns with crossing attacks. But the Devil's Daughter wasn't fighting like a normal B-17 anymore. Hard port bank. 20 degrees. Do it now. The bomber heaved over. Arcangelo's harness cut into his shoulders as gravity pulled him sideways. An FW-190 flashed past, its belly exposed. Arcangelo didn't have a shot. The angle was wrong, but the right waist gunner did. The Browning machine gun chattered. The FW-190 staggered, trailing smoke. 4 down. Level out! Nose up! Climb! Kowalski hauled back on the yoke. The B-17's nose rose. Arcangelo watched as 2 FW-190s, attempting a coordinated attack from below, suddenly found themselves flying directly into his field of fire. He didn't aim. There wasn't time. He just pointed and pulled the trigger and let physics do the rest. The first fighter exploded, literally came apart in mid-air. Debris tumbled past the B-17's wing. The second fighter tried to brake. Too late. Arcangelo stitched him from prop to tail. The FU-190 rolled onto its back and fell away. 6 down. The 3 surviving German fighters broke off the attack. Arcangelo watched them go, black specks against the white German landscape below. His hands were shaking. His ears were ringing from the gunfire. The barrel shrouds on his 50 were glowing cherry red. Kowalski's voice came over the steady as bedrock. Top turret, what's your status? Arcangelo looked at his ammunition nearly. He looked at his jammed turret, still frozen solid. He looked at the empty sky where 9 FW-190s had been 3 minutes earlier. 6 confirmed you, Skipper. 3 ran away. Turret's still jammed, but I don't think we're gonna need it. Outstanding shooting, Mike. Everyone, maintain alert. Navigator, give me a heading home. The rest of the mission was quiet. The Devil's Daughter rejoined the formation. The ball-bearing factory was destroyed. The bomber stream turned west, chased by flak but no more fighters. When they landed back in England 7 hours later, Arcangelo climbed out of his turret and discovered that his legs wouldn't hold him. The ground crew had to help him down. The adrenaline crash hit him all at once. The crew chief approached him, looking up at the turret. Heard you had a mechanical problem. Arcangelo nodded. Hydraulics froze solid. The crew chief frowned. And you still got 6 kills? 9. The crew chief blinked. 9. With a jammed turret. Skipper flew the aircraft. I just aimed. Word spread fast. By the time Arcangelo made it to debriefing, half the squadron knew the story. By the time he made it to the mess hall, the other half had heard a version where he'd somehow shot down 12 fighters while hanging upside down from the turret. The intelligence officer who took his statement didn't believe him at first. Not until Lieutenant Kowalski confirmed every detail. Not until the waist gunners backed up the story. Not until the gun camera film was developed and analyzed. 9 Focke-Wulf 190s, 6 destroyed by top turret fire, 3 by coordinated fire from other positions. All while the B-17 maneuvered like a fighter. It shouldn't have been possible. The next morning, Arcangelo was summoned to the squadron commander's office. He went expecting a reprimand, using an aircraft in an unauthorized manner, risking the lives of the crew, something. Instead, the commander shook his hand. Sergeant Arcangelo, I've been flying bombers for 2 years. I've never seen anything like what you pulled yesterday. The tactics you developed are being written up and distributed to every bombardment group in the 8th Air Force. You just changed how we fight. Arcangelo didn't know what to say. He settled for, "Thank you, sir." The commander smiled. "Don't thank me yet. You're being transferred to a training unit. You're going to teach other gunners how to coordinate with their pilots, how to turn a bomber into a weapons platform instead of just a target. And that's exactly what happened. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. Michael Arcangelo spent the next 4 months at a training base in Arizona, teaching the technique he'd invented at 25,000 feet over Germany. They called it coordinated defensive maneuvering. The concept was simple. Instead of relying solely on individual gunner positions, the pilot and gunners worked together, using the aircraft itself as a stabilized gun platform. It required perfect trust between pilot and gunner. It required split-second communication. It required pilots to fly their aircraft in ways they'd never been trained for. And it saved lives. By mid-1944, coordinated defensive maneuvering was standard doctrine in the 8th Air Force. B-17 and B-24 crews drilled on it constantly. Fighters approaching bomber formations found themselves facing aircraft that didn't just absorb attacks, they responded with aggressive, unpredictable movements that turned defensive guns into offensive weapons. German fighter pilots began avoiding bombers that showed signs of coordinated maneuvering. They focused on stragglers, damaged aircraft, formations that flew predictably. The loss rates dropped. Arcangelo returned to combat duty in May of 1944. He flew 15 more missions before the war in Europe ended. He never had to use his technique again in combat. His turret never jammed, and the Luftwaffe was increasingly absent from the skies. But other crews used it, hundreds of times, thousands. After the war, the Army Air Forces conducted an analysis of bomber defensive tactics. They concluded that coordinated defensive maneuvering had contributed to a measurable decrease in bomber losses during the final year of the European Air War. The exact number was classified, but estimates suggested that hundreds of aircraft and thousands of crew members survived battles they would have otherwise lost, all because a turret jammed at the worst possible moment, and a kid from South Boston refused to accept that a mechanical failure meant death. Michael Arcangelo left the service in 1945 with the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters, and a reputation as one of the most innovative aerial gunners in American military history. He returned to Boston, married his high school sweetheart, and opened an auto repair shop. He rarely talked about the war. His children knew he'd flown in B-17s. They knew he'd been decorated, but they didn't know the details until decades later, when a military historian tracked him down and asked about the incident over Stuttgart. Arcangelo was in his 60s by then. He'd been asked about the war before, always deflected, but this time, he answered. The historian recorded the interview. Arcangelo spoke for 3 hours, detailing not just the famous mission, but everything around it. The fear, the cold, the friends who didn't come back, the weight of knowing that his innovation had been born from desperation and luck as much as skill. People call it brilliant, Arcangelo said near the end of the interview. They say I revolutionized bomber tactics. Truth is, I was just trying not to die. I had a problem, I had tools, I used them. That's not genius. That's just what you do when there's no other option. The historian asked if he was proud of what he'd accomplished. Arcangelo thought for a long time before answering. I'm proud I came home. I'm proud my crew came home. I'm proud that maybe, somewhere along the line, something I figured out helped somebody else come home. The rest of it, the medals, the recognition, the write-ups in the tactical manuals, that's just paperwork. What matters is the lives. Michael Arcangelo died in 2003 at the age of 81. His funeral was attended by dozens of veterans, many of whom he'd never met. They came because they'd heard the story. They came because they understood what it meant. They came because they knew that survival in war isn't about following the manual. It's about writing a new one when the old one fails. The B-17, Devil's Daughter, survived the war. She flew 87 combat missions, more than any other aircraft in her squadron. After the war, she was flown back to the United States and eventually scrapped for aluminum. Her turret was removed and sent to the Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's still there, still jammed in the exact position it froze that January morning over Germany, still pointing at empty sky. A reminder that sometimes the greatest weapons aren't the ones that work perfectly. They're the ones that force you to think differently, to adapt, to survive. Michael Arcangelo's innovation didn't come from a laboratory or a tactical planning session. It came from 25,000 feet, from a moment of mechanical failure, from a desperate idea that shouldn't have worked. But it did, and 9 German fighters fell from the sky because a kid from South Boston looked at a jammed turret and saw not a failure, but an opportunity. The official after-action report from that mission is preserved in the National Archives. It's written in the dry, clinical language of military documentation. Enemy aircraft engaged, 9. Enemy aircraft destroyed, 9. Ammunition expended, 472 rounds. Friendly losses, 0. But tucked into the file, handwritten on a separate sheet of paper, is a note from Lieutenant James Kowalski. It reads, Sergeant Arcangelo displayed extraordinary courage, innovation, and technical proficiency under combat conditions. His actions directly resulted in the survival of this aircraft and crew. He is recommended for the highest recognition. Kowalski survived the war. He became a commercial pilot, flew for Pan Am for 30 years. He stayed in touch with Arcangelo. They met once a year, every year, until Kowalski's death in 1998. At those meetings, they never talked about Stuttgart. They talked about cars, about baseball, about their grandchildren, about everything except the 3 minutes that had defined both their lives. Because they didn't need to talk about it. They'd been there. They'd lived it. They knew what it meant to trust someone completely, to merge two minds into one purpose, to fly a four-engine bomber like a precision instrument. They knew what it was like to face impossible odds and to survive not through strength or firepower, but through improvisation and trust. That's the real lesson of Michael Arcangelo's story. Not that innovation wins wars, though it does. Not that mechanical knowledge is valuable in combat, though it is. The lesson is simpler. When everything goes wrong, when your equipment fails and your training doesn't cover the situation, and death is climbing toward you at 300 miles per hour, you don't give up. You adapt. You use what you have. You trust your crew. You take the broken pieces of a bad situation and you build something new. And sometimes, if you're skilled enough and lucky enough and stubborn enough, you turn a jammed turret into a weapon that changes history. The skies over Germany, January 1944. 9 Focke-Wulf 190s climbing hard, a turret that wouldn't move, and a kid from South Boston who looked at an impossible problem and said, "Not today." That's the story of Staff Sergeant Michael Arcangelo, the man who turned a mechanical failure into the deadliest improvised weapon in 8th Air Force history. The man who taught a generation of bomber crews that survival isn't about having perfect equipment, it's about having perfect trust. 9 fighters fell that day. Thousands of airmen came home because of what he proved was possible. And somewhere in the Air Force Museum, a jammed turret still points at empty sky, frozen in the moment that changed everything. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The morning after the Stuttgart mission, Arcangelo couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk, staring at the corrugated metal ceiling of the Nissen hut, listening to the sounds of 20 other men breathing, snoring, muttering in their dreams. Some of them were reliving missions. Others were back home, safe in their minds, if nowhere else. He kept seeing the lead FW-190 in his gun sight, kept feeling the B-17 bank beneath him, kept hearing Kowalski's voice, steady and certain, following every command without hesitation. Trust, that's what had made it work. Not the mechanical knowledge, not the shooting skill, trust. At 05:30 hours, he gave up on sleep and walked to the mess hall. The coffee was terrible, as always. Chicory and God knew what else, but it was hot, and that counted for something in the perpetual damp cold of England in January. The mess sergeant, a barrel-chested man from Tennessee named Hoskins, poured him a cup without being asked. "Heard you had an interesting day yesterday." Arcangelo wrapped both hands around the cup. "That's one word for it. 9 kills with a jammed turret. Boys are saying you're some kind of wizard. Just got lucky." Hoskins snorted. "Son, I've been in this army since 1938. I know the difference between luck and skill. What you did yesterday was both. Heavy on the skill side." He leaned against the serving counter. "Word is they're sending brass to talk to you. Gonna pick your brain about tactics. I just pointed and shot. Kowalski did the flying. And that's the point, isn't it? You two worked together like you were one person. That's not standard procedure. That's not even in the manual." Hoskins refilled his cup without asking. "That's worth studying." 3 hours later, Arcangelo found himself in a briefing room with 2 colonels, a major from Air Corps Intelligence, and a civilian who introduced himself as Dr. Raymond Peterson from the Office of Scientific Research and Development. Dr. Peterson was in his 50s, thin as a rail, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He spoke with a Boston accent even thicker than Arcangelo's. "Sergeant, I've reviewed your after-action report. I've spoken with Lieutenant Kowalski. I've examined the gun camera footage. What you accomplished yesterday shouldn't be possible according to current defensive doctrine." Arcangelo shifted in his chair. "Sir, Peterson held up a hand. "Please don't say you got lucky. Luck doesn't account for 6 precision kills in 3 minutes using an immobilized weapons platform. That's applied physics, spatial reasoning, and extraordinary coordination." He pushed his glasses up. "I want to understand the cognitive process. When your turret jammed, what was your first thought?" Arcangelo considered the question, really considered it. "I thought about my dad's garage. When a lift breaks, you don't abandon the car. You figure out another way to get underneath it. Problem solving through mechanical analogy. Excellent. Continue." "The turret wouldn't move, but the aircraft would. So instead of trying to move the guns to the target, I moved the target to the guns." Peterson was scribbling notes. "And how did you communicate this to your pilot?" "Told him I needed him to fly the aircraft like a gun mount." "Did you have any doubt he would comply?" Arcangelo shook his head. "No, sir. Kowalski's the best pilot in the squadron. If anyone could do it, he could." "So you had established trust prior to this incident?" "We'd flown 27 missions together. Yeah, we trusted each other." Peterson exchanged glances with the colonels. "Gentlemen, I think we're looking at something significant here. This isn't just about improvisation in combat. It's about crew integration at a level we haven't formally acknowledged." He turned back to Arcangelo. "Sergeant, standard doctrine treats bomber crews as specialists working in proximity. You're suggesting they should function as a unified organism. I'm not suggesting anything, sir. I'm just telling you what worked. One of the colonels, a man with graying temples and pilot's wings, leaned forward. Sergeant Arcangelo, we're forming a tactical development unit. Small group, experienced combat personnel, tasked with testing new defensive concepts. We want you in it. You'd work directly with pilots, other gunners, running simulations and combat trials. The goal would be to formalize what you discovered yesterday and train other crews. Arcangelo felt his stomach drop. Sir, with respect, I'm a gunner. I shoot at enemy aircraft. I'm not a teacher. You are now, the colonel said. This is a direct order, Sergeant. You report to the Tactical Development Unit at OR 800 tomorrow. Bring your gear. You'll be billeted separately from your regular squadron. That night, Arcangelo sat on his bunk and wrote a letter to his father. He didn't mention the mission, didn't mention the 9 kills, didn't mention the new assignment. Instead, he wrote about the weather, about the food, about the other men in his crew. He wrote about everything except what mattered. Because how do you explain to your father, a man who'd never been more than 50 miles from Boston, that you'd discovered something in combat that was going to change how America fought the war? How do you explain that a jammed turret and 3 minutes of terror had turned you into someone the Army thought was worth studying? You don't. You write about the weather and the food and hope that somehow, between the lines, he understands that you're okay, that you're still his son, that the war hasn't changed you into someone unrecognizable. Even though it has, the Tactical Development Unit was housed in a separate section of the base, away from the operational squadrons. 12 men, 4 pilots, 4 gunners, 2 navigators, and 2 bombardiers. All combat veterans, all hand-picked. The commanding officer was Major Thomas Harriman, a former test pilot who'd transitioned to bombers after Pearl Harbor. He'd flown 35 missions, more than enough to go home. He'd volunteered to stay. Harriman gathered them in a briefing room on the first morning. Gentlemen, we're here because the brass thinks we can reduce loss rates. Right now, we're losing bombers at an unsustainable pace. The 8th Air Force is hemorrhaging aircraft and crew faster than we can replace them. Something has to change. He clicked on an overhead projector. A chart appeared showing loss statistics by month. The numbers were staggering. In the past 3 months, we've lost over 400 heavy bombers. That's 4,000 men killed, captured, or missing. The Germans are getting better at intercepting us. Our defensive tactics aren't keeping pace. He paused. That changes today. For the next week, they ran simulations. Arcangelo worked with a pilot named Captain Richard Brennan, a quiet man from Iowa who flew with mathematical precision. They started with basic exercises. Arcangelo would call maneuvers, Brennan would execute them, and ground observers would track their ability to maintain a stable firing platform. It was harder than combat. In combat, instinct takes over. You react. You don't think. But in training, you have to break down every element, explain every decision, make the unconscious conscious. Arcangelo struggled with it. On the 4th day, after a particularly frustrating session, Brennan pulled him aside. You're overthinking this, Mike. In your after-action report from Stuttgart, you didn't calculate angles or plan sequences. You just called what felt right. That's what we need to capture. The intuition. How do you teach intuition? Brennan smiled. You don't teach it. You create conditions where it can develop. We need to get pilots and gunners flying together so much that the communication becomes automatic. Not practiced, automatic. That became the foundation of the program. Instead of teaching specific maneuvers, they focused on building crew cohesion. Pilots and gunners flew together constantly, not just in training, but in every aspect of daily life. They ate together, played cards together, briefed together. The goal was simple: make the crew bond so strong that communication became telepathic. It worked. By the end of February, the Tactical Development Unit had produced a training manual that was distributed to every heavy bomber group in the European theater of operations. It wasn't a list of maneuvers, it was a philosophy. Treat your crew as one organism, not 10 individuals. The results were measurable. Squadrons that implemented the training showed a 23% reduction in losses during the spring of 1944. Aircraft returned with battle damage, but fewer casualties. Gunners reported higher kill rates. Pilots reported greater confidence, and German fighter pilots began changing their tactics, avoiding bomber formations that showed signs of coordinated defensive movement. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. In March 1944, Arcangelo received a letter from his mother. His younger brother, Anthony, had enlisted in the Navy. He was 17, had lied about his age, and was shipping out for basic training in 2 weeks. Arcangelo read the letter 3 times, then walked to the base chapel and sat in the back pew for an hour, not praying exactly, just sitting, thinking about his kid brother, who'd been 12 years old when Arcangelo left for the service. thinking about how the war was eating up families, whole generations, feeding on young men like a machine that could never be satisfied. He wrote back that night, told Anthony to keep his head down, follow orders, trust his shipmates. The same advice every older brother was giving every younger brother in every corner of the world. Hollow advice, useless advice, but it was all he had. April brought the build-up to D-Day, though no one called it that yet. They just knew something big was coming. The base was flooded with new aircraft, new crews, new equipment. The operational tempo increased, missions every day, sometimes twice a day, hitting targets across France and Germany. Arcangelo flew 2 more combat missions in April, both times with his original crew. The Devil's Daughter was showing her age, hydraulic leaks, engine troubles, patches on patches, but she kept flying. Kowalski refused to give her up. She brought us home 29 times, he told Arcangelo. I'm not switching now, that's bad luck. On their 30th mission together, they hit a marshalling yard outside Paris. The flak was moderate, the fighters non-existent. An easy run by 8th Air Force standard. They were 20 minutes from the English coast on the return flight when number 3 engine caught fire. Kowalski feathered the prop, activated the fire suppression system. The fire went out, then reignited, then went out again. We're losing altitude, the co-pilot reported, his voice tight. Can't maintain formation speed on 3 engines. Height. Arcangelo watched through his turret as the main formation pulled away, growing smaller against the gray English Channel below. The Devil's Daughter was alone now, a straggler, exactly the kind of target that German fighters loved. Kowalski's voice came over the intercom, calm as ever. All positions, maintain alert. We're 40 miles from home. Stay sharp. They made it 35 miles before the WWIIs found them, 4 of them this time, approaching from the north. They'd been waiting, patrolling the coast, looking for exactly this. A damaged bomber, alone, barely staying airborne. Arcangelo felt his heart rate slow, felt the familiar calm settle over him. He'd done this before. They all had. Bandits! 11 o'clock high, he called. 4 Fu-190s closing fast. I see them, Kowalski replied. Mike, you ready? Born ready, Skipper. But this time was different. This time, the Devil's Daughter wasn't at full power. This time, they were heavy, sluggish, barely maintaining altitude. This time, Kowalski couldn't throw the aircraft around like he had over Stuttgart. This time, they'd have to be smarter. The lead FW-190 came in fast, firing from 800 yards. Too far. The rounds fell short, splashing into the channel below. He's testing us, Arcangelo said. Wants to see if we'll maneuver. What do you want me to do? Arcangelo watched the fighters circle, setting up for another pass. 4 aircraft. Coordinated attack. They'd learned since Stuttgart. They wouldn't bunch up, wouldn't give him easy targets. He made a decision. Nothing. Hold course. Let them think we're dead in the water. The intercom erupted with protests from the other gunners. The waist gunners wanted to engage. The ball turret was calling for evasive action. Kowalski overrode them all. Steady as she goes. Mike's running this show. The FW-190s came in again. 2 from port, 2 from starboard. Classic scissors attack. Arcangelo watched them close. Watched them commit to their attack runs. Steady, he said quietly. Steady. 600 yards. 500. 400. Now! Hard starboard bank! The Devil's Daughter rolled right. The 2 portside fighters flashed past, their fire going wide. The 2 starboard fighters suddenly found themselves flying directly at a B-17 that was turning into them, not away. Arcangelo opened fire on the lead fighter. So did the starboard waist gunner. So did the ball turret. The FW-190 disintegrated. Its wingman pulled up hard, avoiding the debris. Too hard. He stalled, hung in the air for a frozen moment, and began to fall. The tail gunner caught him on the way down. 2 fighters gone in 5 seconds. The surviving pair broke off, climbing hard, assessing. Arcangelo reloaded, cleared a jam, checked his ammunition. Nice shooting, boys, Kowalski. Coast is 15. We're going to make it. And they did. The Devil's Daughter touched down at the base 45 minutes later. Number 3 engine dead, hydraulics failing, fuel tanks nearly empty. The crew climbed out, exhausted, exhilarated, alive. That was their 30th mission. Their last mission. Kowalski's tour was complete. So was Arcangelo's. They'd both flown more than the required 25 missions. They could go home. Neither of them wanted to, but orders were orders. They were going home.